Now, finding information about the publisher can be even trickier than finding information about the author. The rule of thumb is the bigger the periodical, like CNN.com or SportsIllustrated.com, the harder it's going to be to find out exactly who publishes that periodical. This article, Arming Teachers to Protect Students, was published on a medium-sized online newspaper called the Washington Times, and that you'll find that information usually right here. Now, the Washington Times, let's try clicking on their homepage. Most websites will have an About page, which is usually found at the very bottom. And of course, there's 1,000 ads we have to tiptoe our way past. Find us on Twitter, find us on Facebook. Home, news, politics, subscribe, classifieds. I'm looking all over. Down at the bottom, there's this little ribbon. And here we see a link that says About. Click on that link. This should tell you something about their editorial viewpoint. It's published by the Washington Times Limited Liability Corporation, which also publishes its flagship Washington, D.C. edition, National Digital Edition, National Weekly, American Currency, and hosts several radio podcast programs. But this doesn't tell us who owns Washington Times. So what we want to do is, we'll click on a new window and just Google who owns the Washington Times. Not the Washington Post. That's owned by someone else. Who owns the Washington Times? Let's just see what we come up with. Here's a Wikipedia article. Founded in 1982 by Unification Church leader Sun Myung Moon. Let's see who owns them now. And the history of the newspaper. That probably doesn't involve us. We have information here about the executive editor. That can also give you some information about the editorial viewpoint of the newspaper. Wesley Pruden was named executive editor. If you can find the name of the executive editor, that sometimes works well enough because that's going to tell you a lot about the potential bias of the periodical. Let's go back and see if we can find out who really owns them. Sun Myung Moon's death leaves conservative newspaper or something. Let's read this article. Sun Myung Moon was the head of a controversial branch of Christianity based in Korea. Some people called it a cult. What's interesting about that is what influence he may have had over the editorial outlook of the newspaper. That's sort of the point. So for publisher information, if you can find out who the executive editor is, I would accept that. Just say so-and-so is the executive editor, and let's find out what we can learn about that person. So the new executive editor John F. Solomon, and there is a Wikipedia article about him. So it may be very difficult to find out information about who publishes a periodical, but keep trying. And again, if you really can't find out anything, then you'll have to write a whole paragraph about all the places that you looked.